I want to remind you also that we in Massachusetts, while preparing for the inevitable, we gathered the people together. And we gathered together for our own protection. There were many times that things would happen and we would need to protect one another. You know, the reason that the British went after our powder was not just to take those arms for us and disarm us and all of that. Do you know why the powder was stored outside of town? Some of you do. Do you not know why the powder was stored outside of town? Yes, because it would be dangerous to the neighbors. Now, we did have some regulation to say this is the amount of powder that you could have in your home. And it was a purpose was because that's what you can get a bag of shot together with so that you can come together quickly. Did you know also, and this is the one that really is interesting, are there any pastors here or church leaders? You know, during the Revolution, the pastors called their people to come to church with their firearms. If you didn't show up without your musket at church, you got fined. Now, what would we see in the churches today? Where are the pastors today? One of the other things that I want to be interested in for your knowledge, do you know that you're free men and free women? You're free. You're free. Do we have people here, I think in your state, they're called precinct committee officers? Are there any precinct committee officers here? Precinct committee officers. You are selectmen. Now, in my day, when we elected the selectmen, they were men of honor. We trusted them, and they were engaged in our communities. So there's two things that happen. The selectmen at an important time would call the freemen together. And because of the principles by which we established the colonies under, the freemen came together. And if you didn't, you were taken to task. And the idea was that each and every one of you had a voice. And today, that voice has been preserved. You have that voice. Just as the senator had talked earlier today, you need to make that voice known. And one of the things that is the responsibility of your precinct committee men and women, those select persons, it is their responsibility to call the community together, to be engaged in the community, to go out to that community and to talk. We want to know from what Mr. Didier was saying, was that what are some of the answers? It is that continuation of bringing that community together, which there is no more, which we had in our day. We knew our neighbors. We knew how to interact with them. And we called them and held them responsible for their individual freedom. You see, at that time, one of the things that we talked about is that you cannot take that freedom away, nor can you give it away. You cannot give your freedom away. You see, we called it highly criminal for a citizen to be indifferent, a spectator of the miseries of his country, much more to desert her while she's struggling for liberty, and still more to seek refuge in a very time of her conflict in arms of her cruel and inverted enemies. It cannot then be thought strange that those who love and revere their country feel an indignation against the men who have held her safety, her liberty, her honor at so cheap. Those that do that, we called traitors. Those that set this nation in the way that I see America going today are absolutely what we would call traitors. And one of the things that I made very, very clear, and I will restate it today, socialism is unconstitutional. Socialism is unconstitutional. Did you hear me? Miss Governor Hutchinson of our time, that was the governor in our day. Socialism is unconstitutional. You see, I was one of those anti-federalists. And it was because as I studied that law and I understood the perspective of things, I knew that the nation could very easily devolve. And we needed to preserve those rights. And I respect that convention because I sat in Congress. I was, if you did not know, the minister in Congress responsible for arming our troops. I was very involved with General Washington in that regard. Not only that, I was on the committee and the head of the committee for the medical responsibilities in the nation of that time. You know, folks, I knew everything about healthcare in the day. And I can tell you, what you're seeing today is not what we developed for healthcare. One of the things also, as we look at it, the Constitution be never construed to authorize Congress to infringe the just liberties of the press or the right of conscience or to prevent the people of the United States who are citizens from keeping their own arms. And the idea again of what it meant from a standing army, and I know that there are many here that have served in the military faithfully, that we know that when we listen to our commander, we listen for just orders. But as the time went by and we saw in the British Army, there were many there, especially amongst the Hessians, they did not care. They did not care. And those standing armies would take the perspective of their orders from their commanders and not understand the freedoms and liberties of the people. And that is why the militias were of a free people, of you, the freemen. The thing that we heard before and the thing that we prayed about, and we prayed often because we knew that God interacts in society. We knew that He interacts in the lives of the individual. We said, if heaven punishes communities for their vices, how sore must be the punishment of that community who think the rights of human nature not worthy struggling for, and patiently submit to tyranny. I will rely upon it that New England will never incur the curse of heaven for neglecting to defend her liberties. I have to attest to you that I and my cousin John wrote more than half of the Massachusetts Constitution. And I have rolled over in my grave to see what Massachusetts has become in your century. I roll over in my grave to see what it is turned into and stepped away from liberty, to step away from those things that were God-given and properly written. I pray God to increase their virtue and make them happy in the full and quiet possession of those liberties they have so highly prized. I pray that not only Massachusetts, but the rest of this nation return to the God of heaven and understands that it is from Him that liberty comes, and only through Him again can we have the restoration of our freedoms and liberties today. One of the things that I will leave you with is, as we convened at that time in 1788, and I mentioned that I stood firm against the Constitution. And it was not until we sat down and were able to come to a conference that allowed for amendments. It is written in the Massachusetts Convention references the wisdom of all these amendments, some of which had been canvassed from the other states, was apparent when most of them were accepted by the nation in that first joining of Congress. The first, third, sixth, seventh, and eighth clauses of the conciliatory propositions being adopted in those articles of amendment. But while the whole of Mr. Adams, myself's resolutions were now formed within the first, the second, the third, and the fourth articles of those amendments. Folks, I know to which I speak on the First Amendment. I definitely know what I speak of on the Second Amendment, because I had a great influence of what you have today. Preserve it. Be involved as you are. Contact your legislators. Contact your PCOs. Work with them. Get them moving and motivated. And join them in community as we did in that day. It was our responsibility. One of the things that we did when those selectmen called, there was a time that we gathered 3,000 people together and spent 18 hours discussing the issues. Then we took them to the House of Congress, which that time was the House there in Massachusetts alone. You see, we have that power. You have that power. As you heard before, you are empowered. And I want to leave you with that, is please to go out and to let your fellow Americans know the truth, the history of who we are as a people. I thank you very much for allowing me to grace your century.